Hello there. A few years ago, a defining and humbling event happened in my journey as a weather enthusiast and spotter. A tornado of Joplin proportions races towards one of the largest cities in Tornado Alley, but an apocalypse is averted, and miraculously spares the lives of all, including my dad's. Here is my story of the 2019 Lawrence Linwood tornado. So today is May 28, 2019, and I wake up from a deep sleep, and I'm excited about the weather coming up because obviously I love, storms and weather, but I'm also on edge because I know that it's one where it's probably going to be like the highlight of the year for us. So a little nervous too, but so the Storm Prediction Center has us under an enhanced risk. They do these little category things. Of like what risk you're under for severe weather. Enhanced is pretty high up. It's you only have a few of them a year here in Kansas City. And so we've been under one for a few days already, and we wake up to that still there. So I get on mesoanalysis, which is NOAA, the National, Administration for Weather and things like that. That's their page for where you can access the public models and to forecast weather on your own. So I get on mesoanalysis and I see that there's already CAPE values that are in like thousands already, and basically what CAPE is, that's the energy for storms, and we measure it in joules per kilogram. But there's already like something like 2 or 3,000 joules already, and it's only like 6 a.m. Like I wake up and I'm getting ready for school, so which I'm actually I'm only 11 at the time, actually in middle school, finishing off sixth grade. We had a brutal winter, so we're still in school. But yeah, so I get ready for school. I keep getting ready, and my dad puts on his UPS uniform. And I tell him that the Storm Prediction Center has us under a 10% risk for tornadoes, which that's going to kind of be an issue later with the whole percent thing. Not everyone understand. Back then, I didn't really get that. Not everyone understands those the way a lot of us weather weenies do. So, but yeah, I told him 10%, and then he was like, "Oh yeah, that does kind of sound a little high." And I said, "Be careful. I love you." Yeah, yada yada. So I go to school, and since it's the end of the year, drawing close to it, we have about a week of school left. We have like a ceremony for the sixth graders and everyone, I'm pretty sure. But so my mom actually comes to school for that. And in my first block class, before we get to the ceremony, I check the Storm Prediction Center, and they upgrade our risk from enhanced to a moderate, which a moderate is where you start getting into territories for like, you can already get horrible stuff at a slight risk, which is a 2 out of 5, but moderate's a 4 out of 5. That's when you start getting to like, events of the year for the whole world usually. Like that's not good when you sit over your area. So I'm instantly like, oh boy, stuff's going to get real this afternoon. And I check the tornado percentage, and it's gone up to 15%. And I was like, okay, wow. Well, Joplin was a 10%. So instantly I kind of imagine in my head, I remember in my head just picturing dark wedge tornadoes, which are a wedge is wider than it is tall, but I'm just picturing large tornadoes, and my house is in it, and I'm like, yeah. And earlier in my first block class, I actually checked what we call the HRRR model. I didn't really know how to use it back then. I was in like sixth grade, but I mean, I didn't learn how to use it for a couple months later. But so back then, I just looked at the reflectivity Doppler radar kind of future scan of it. And I didn't really think anything really, like, it didn't look too terrible, honestly, like big supercells. It just looked like a lot of activity. And then that risk came out, and I was like, okay, stuff's gonna get real. But so we head down to the ceremony. We all get sat down. They have the chairs laid out for us and our parents and stuff. So my mom actually comes out, but my dad can't because he is at work. But so, mom comes out. I get to meet her again. And of course, I tell her, like, afterwards, about the weather. But so we get in there, and I try to look for her, and I see her, and I think I waved to her. Like, we kind of go by rows to get called up onto the stage, and so they call my row or whatever, I think, and then I work my way up to the stage, all like, oh mom, I hope you're watching and everything. And my name gets called, and then I walk across the stage and grab whatever it is I grabbed. I can't remember, and then I go back down and sit back down. And then after the ceremony, they kind of let us talk with our parents and take pictures and things. And I tell my mom, there's a moderate risk issued for severe weather, yada yada, it's going to get bad. And she's like, yeah, okay, maybe, but just stay focused on school. And I'm like, yep, I got it, no problem. And then so we say, I love you, yada yada, and we go about our days. So we get to my second block class, which is reading, and I tell my reading teacher about the moderate risk. I tell her there's a moderate risk for severe weather. I just want to be quiet because I don't want to scare anyone. And then she's like, "What?" And then I'm like, "Yeah, it's gonna get bad." They're thinking, it might be tornadoes. We think it's gonna be pretty intense. So that happens, and then we go throughout the rest of the day. I can't really remember what happens throughout the rest of the day, to be honest. I just remember keeping up with the SBC a lot, looking at trends when I found the free time. And so I get to my fourth block class, which was science, and towards the end of that block, the Storm Prediction Center put out a tornado watch. So then I was like, okay, well, I saw that coming, so I wasn't surprised by it, but it was interesting. But they also dropped the tornado percentage chance back down to 10%. So I was like, well, that's interesting. I wonder why. But we still had a moderate risk, though. And 10% still a lot. I think Joplin 2011 was a 10%. Moore, Oklahoma 2013 was a 10%. So that's still nothing to sneeze at. So I was like, okay, well, there is still a possibility this could be bad. So, but yeah, the tornado watch is out, and then we get let out of school. So school lets out, and I go home, I head out of school to go home and walk to my bus. And on my way out of there, the humidity was, living here in Kansas City, you're used to humidity, but the humidity was more than anything I can really recall, to be honest. I went out, and my lanyard, the little thing you have around your neck and stuff, the plastic on my lanyard was starting to get damp from how humid it was. And right then, that's kind of when I knew. I was like, today is gonna really pop something really intense off. I just had a gut feeling, like spiritually and scientifically, like just, all right, we got problems. So I tell a teacher who I say bye to, I'm like, it's so humid, and she's like, yeah, I know. And I say, there's a tornado watch. She's like, yeah, I know, yeah. But yeah, and so I go home, and so I get home, I get to my room, and I meet my mom. I update her about stuff, and I tell her about the 10%, and she's like, I just really don't think that sounds like a lot. And then she notices that Kansas City is in the SIG severe, and she's like, hey, wait, SIG severe, what's that? And I'm like, yeah, we're in that. And she's like, oh, well, hopefully it doesn't come. And I'm like, yeah. But yeah, and so after that, can't really remember exactly where I was in that point in time in my room, but so I'm pretty sure I take a short nap or just chill out. But then, so an hour or so later, I check the radar scope, my radar app that I have used since 2018. I love it, still use it on my chases and all that. But I check that, and I see there's a big cluster of severe thunderstorms out to the west, way out past Topeka, out to the southwest, kind of near Emporia, between there and Topeka. And there's severe warnings, and then one of them has a tornado warning. And there's nothing crazy yet, but just big storms, though. They're still way out there, and it looks like they're moving really kind of northeast. Like they might head up to more St. Joe. And I remember thinking, I was like, hey, we might be missed altogether. So I was like, oh, well, we're going to see. But then, get to maybe about 40 minutes later, and I'm seeing trends. I'm like, okay, well, this thing's starting to definitely make a turn further to the east. Started turning right a little bit. And then I was like, okay, we definitely got to watch. And so when supercells turn right, they often it kind of increases the wind shear, which is the changing of winds they have to work with. So it can increase their strength. And I was like, okay, well, yep, let's watch this and just be careful. Let's keep an eye on this. And so about another 20-30 minutes pass, and I go out in my backyard. The storm's probably 40-50 miles away still. No sign of severe weather other than the fact that the sky is just this grayish, brownish, yellowish color. But it's not super dark yet, but it's noticeably more intense than a usual overcast day. And on radar, the storm definitely is starting to look like a supercell thunderstorm. It's got kind of a boomerang shape, not a classic hook. It's just like a boomerang shape, kind of, which means that it has a lot of inflow. And I was like, okay, well, this thing's aiming right for us now, so it's not going to miss us. We got to really watch this, because if it produces a tornado, this is a type of storm. It's just tracking in one direction. So we're in the path. If it produces a tornado, Lord be with us at that point, because this thing probably won't be changing direction a whole lot. So I'm like, okay, well, we gotta, pay attention. And so I noticed that as I'm watching the sky to the west, a flash of lightning occurs, and I think to myself, that's so weird because the storm is like still 40, 50 miles away. It's still, I don't even think it had produced the EF2 tornado in Lone Star, Kansas yet, on Lone Star Lake. I don't even think that had happened yet. It might have, but it was a while out still. Like, you shouldn't be seeing lightning that close anyway. It was, within, 6 or 7 miles. And so I hear thunder, and then like a minute passes, and then another lightning flash lights up the sky right in that same exact area, and then thunder about the same amount of time later. And then I see on radar scope, they have lightning data where they plot the lightning strikes. I see that right in that same exact spot, there's 2 lightning bolts plotted over Leavenworth County, Kansas, and the supercell is, out churning southwest of Lawrence, Kansas. And right after that, I think, okay, well, I knew positive light. Those are called positive lightning strikes typically when they strike away from the storm like that, and usually they mean a storm is meaning to, it's gearing up, it's gonna be business. So I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. And then I noticed on radar the inflow of the supercell really starts to look a lot more like, robust, and the supercell starts becoming less of a boomerang and more of a comet shape on radar. So the hook echo starts moving in, and wrapping around. I was like, okay, this is bad. Here we go. So that happens. Then I check radar velocity, which is the wind motions in the storm you can look at, and I see, a lot of green and red right on each other. I was like, okay, here we go. This is about to tornado now. And I check what we call correlation coefficient, where you can look to see if there's debris being lofted, and it'll show up as like a green or blue ball, sometimes black if it's bad enough. But I check that and I see a big blue ball, kind of green moving into blue now, and I'm like, and I see it right where that rotation is. I'm like, oh boy, so we got a tornado on the ground now. So I move back into the house just to see if dinner's ready, because I guess my mom had put in a pizza, and so I get up there and she had burnt the pizza, so I can move in there to tell her, hey, there's a tornado. It's about maybe less than an hour out, maybe an hour out or so. But yeah, I guess she burnt the pizza, and she's like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, oh no, it's okay, don't worry. But it wasn't like super bad, so I still ate it, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, I mean, so I tell her, hey, there's a tornado on the ground. It's gonna be here in about an hour if it keeps up. So next thing I remember was we had the news on, and we're not under any tornado warning yet. We're not under any immediate any immediate danger. This thing's a while out still. But we have the news on, KBC9, and she comes in and helps me put it on my TV if I want. But she sees me, I have a tornado emergency up on my phone, up on TV. And she's like, is that us? And I'm like, no, which is ironic because that's going to change. But I was like, no, I'm just watching coverage from, I think it was March 3rd of 2019 that year. Someone had a screenshot of it, And I was like, no, so this isn't us. And she just kind of gives me this look, and I was like, okay, well, why is that? Why didn't you watch it? But yeah, and then so later she puts on my TV the coverage for me, and I see this, I see the tornado, and I'm like, okay, wow, there it is. They're zoomed in on the left side, on the right side, the right side of this big thick rain shaft of rain in this thunderstorm. And you can see it's kind of cone shaped on the side. It's diagonal slanted, and just going up the side of it, you can see vertical motion, kind of waves riding up the side of it, and also debris kind of in that, just careening up the side of it. I was like, okay, wow, so that's a tornado. And I remember thinking to myself, that's at least an EF2. That's not going to be an EF0, EF1. That's definitely a strong tornado. And I was like, okay, yeah, I see that. On radar, it still looked pretty impressive. And then I went into, I went into mom, I went into their room and stuff, and we're watching TV on the couch, and they're like, yeah, Lawrence, Kansas, it's moving in, it's up near that area now, so be careful, it's rain wrapped. And I see on TV the structure visually of the storm for the first time, and I'm just looking, I'm like, yep, that's a lot of rain wrapped tornado. That's a ton of rain, just looked like a microburst, which I had watched this really good chaser named Skip Talbot, who goes in depth about storm structure, so I could kind of understand what I was seeing on the TV and correlate it with radar and stuff. So that helped out a lot, but it also made it scarier because I knew what we were dealing with. But so on the right side of the tornado, there was this big long stream of clouds, dark black clouds moving in from the right. And I was like, that's inflow into this thing. I'm like, man, that is a monstrous inflow. We call it a beaver tail. And so, yeah, we see that. They're hitting it hard. You need Lawrence, you need to take shelter, going up to Eudora. And I see on radar, I'm like, wow, this thing's a full-blown wedge tornado. This thing is not good. If it hit a town, it would be a town leveler. So, things keep moving on. Tornado moves on from Lawrence. It goes to kind of, like Eudora. And then it gets up towards Linwood. And that's where on radar, I am really kind of starting to be like, I notice trends. I'm like, wow, this thing is keeping on track to our house. Now it's about maybe 30, 40 minutes out, instead of an hour out, which generally is no big deal. But on a tornado like this, that's a lot less time than you think. So I was like, well, okay. That started getting me real nervous. I noticed it could not be any more center line headed for our house. So I was just like, okay, well, we got time, but hopefully that, lifts or changes direction or something like that. You know what I mean? So that's moving in, and the sky outside is getting darker. Even though the storm itself is still, the tornado's still about half an hour out, maybe a little more. And the rain of the storm is still probably a good, 10 miles out. So I was like, okay, well, it's already dark, so that's a problem. But on radar, the storm looks about as mean as you can get. This was my first violent tornado that I'd ever tracked on radar scope. I'd still seen quite a few strong ones on radar scope, including, I think, a EF4 in Franklin, Texas, if you know that one. On radar in April, a month before I saw that. That was a big one. That was the first real big tornado I saw on radar, but this outdid that many times over. It started even glitching. That's when I really got nervous. I saw the radar glitch. That's the first time I had seen the winds inside the tornado on radar get so strong that they pretty much shatter the radar, and I was like, gosh, okay. That's when I knew this thing was, if it were to hit a metro area or a populated city, it would be a historic disaster. It would be, a Joplin, Missouri, or a St. Louis, 1986. It would be a bad one. So that's when that's when the scenarios start playing in my head, okay. Stuff you don't want to think about, stuff you think you won't ever have to think about. And I'm like, okay, yep. And the news is on this thing. It's looking mean. It's a big wedge tornado. It's rain wrapped, so it's hard to see most of the time. But every now and then they can get a visual and zoom back into like what I was saying with that visual with the debris riding up the side of the tornado and on the right side. And it's black. It's mean, and you can see power flashes as well occasionally. Right as it went through the northwest parts of Linwood, Kansas, power flashes lit up the underneath of the tornado. So, unbeknownst to me at the time, my dad was out in the Bonner Springs area delivering, and he had not long finished on Linwood and Stillwell roads. As the supercell hung low over the town, my dad could hear the buzzing of weather alerts, as well as the ominous deep roar of the tornado, though was hidden from view. He begins looking for shelter, as his UPS truck is not suitable for the forces of a tornado. He heads to Highlands Apartments on the northern side of Bonner Springs, Kansas, where he can shelter in a washroom. That was intense, and from there, I'm pretty sure it stayed in that area, and this was before I found out about where my dad was, which I'll get to that here in a second. But you can actually hear the sirens going off in the other county just to our west. You could tell they weren't exactly our county because they were real quiet. They were like really quiet, but ever so slightly. Like I remember my mom had opened the window or the door maybe to look outside or something, and then you could hear him. I was like, oh my gosh. I told her, I was like, you can hear the sirens from the other county. And I was like, I told her, should we go to the basement, because I'm just really not liking it. And she was like, well, no, unless it's for us, I'm not going down there. And I was like, all right, fine, I get it. And so we stay upstairs for now because we're not under a warning. But I notice on radar another disturbing trend is this thing has like 3 or 4 different tornado warning boxes on it. Usually, obviously, you just have one tornado warning for one storm. That makes sense, right? This one tornado had like 4 different tornado warnings on it, and I was like, okay, that is not good. Like, that is not good if you see that. I knew part of it was because it was in between the National Weather Service offices of Topeka and Kansas City, so they had to kind of hand it over, and they can't issue warnings over one of the other areas, so they had to kind of issue it accordingly as it moved in between the areas. But yeah, that was bad. And then I also noticed that on the news, some of those were tornado emergencies, and so that's why they had to reissue the tornado warnings for a tornado emergency. And the tornado emergency, that is, they use that for the worst of the worst. That's when you have an EF3, 4, 5 tornado moving into a populated area. People are going to die. You need to get underground. You need to do whatever you have to do to get underground or out of the path of this monster. So I'm like, okay, well, we're not into the tornado emergency, but it's aimed right at us. And they've issued a big long one tracking right over Wyandotte County, Kansas, and all the way up to the Missouri border, which is a couple miles to our southwest. So I was like, all right, here we go. Yeah. And then I noticed some of the towns in line. I'm like, wow, this thing's headed right into Kansas City, northwest parts of the metro, and going to be into the Northland, in 30 minutes if this thing keeps up. So I find out later about, I guess, a stream that had been on. I kind of go back to my room to kind of try and escape the situation and go on like YouTube to try and escape it. But since I had been watching a lot of weather content, obviously from the past week, it had been a really active tornado season across the country. Someone's stream was actually up, in the algorithm on my phone and came up on the tornado that's headed for us. And I remember I clicked into it, and it was a meteorologist. And I remember the first thing I remember hearing out of it was he was comparing it to Joplin. And I remember my heart just... As my dad parks his UPS truck to run inside the apartments to seek shelter, the rain bands surrounding the wedge tornado begin to overtake him. Under normal circumstances in a situation like this, getting to shelter would need extreme haste for any individual, as they would likely only have moments to live. But somehow, some way, this tornado finds a sense of mercy, not just on my dad, but on all of Bonner Springs proper. I don't know. I mean, it was, when I heard that, I was like, no, that's not good. And then right after that, or maybe before, but one of the news people from one of our channels here in Kansas City said this type of tornado could leave your neighborhood unrecognizable, in quotes, and he quoted that from the National Weather Service. I already knew that based on radar, but to hear that was something I'll never forget. So I'm like, all right. And then I move into back into my mom's room, and I'm real nervous, obviously. I sound way more nervous in real life than I do telling this story. And I remember thinking, I was like, where's my dad? Because I know he works out in this area, I know he works in Bonner Springs. So I was like, my mom was on the phone with him, and I was like, okay, great. That means I can talk to him and ask where he's at. Because I remember looking at the radar in Wyandotte County. I was like, well, Bonner Springs, whoever's in this town, I feel bad, because this town is if this doesn't change, this town is going to get wiped off the map, clean. This town's gone. So I'm like, okay, where's my dad? Maybe he's not in Bonner, maybe he's somewhere else. So I asked Mom, and it takes me 3 times. I'm like, okay, where's my dad? Where is he? And he's like, where's my dad at? And I know she didn't want to scare me, but and then she said, in this very sad voice, he's in Bonner Springs, and my heart just sank to the core of the earth. I was like, there's no way this is happening right now. And I start crying, obviously. But before I start crying, I have my mom give me the phone, and I tell Dad, I talk to him. I'm like, what's it like? Are you okay? Yada yada. And the thing that gets me the most, the thing that really pushed me to start crying, was that in the background I heard, over his voice, just behind his voice, I hear the panicking and crying of people that he's sheltering with. That hurt a lot. That really put things into perspective more than they already were. That really made me realize what was at stake. There was just, it was so overwhelming at that point. All right, this could be it. I love you, Dad. And I was just like, okay. I gave the phone back to my mom, and I started crying on the couch. And we had some good prayers that in those minutes for sure. But I kind of turned my radar scope off with the reflectivity and velocity and all that, which, by the way, the correlation coefficient, the debris ball was just monstrous. I was like, and considering the fact this tornado hit in the country, so imagine if it had hit a metro, what it would have been like. Right, even then, the debris ball was just massive. The radar was just too much to look at. I just turned it off. You know, and I didn't want to look at it. The storm outside, was drawing closer. You could hear a lot of thunder. You could hear, the rain is ever so starting to start light, and it's starting to get things wet outside. Just usually I'd be all over it. I'd be like, yay, we're finally getting a supercell storm, Then I'm so traumatized by this storm. I don't want to see it. I don't want to, and every look out the window, every rumble of thunder, every radar scan update, every flash of lightning was just a reminder of, this thing's coming ever closer to everything, and it could be over. It was just it was just a lot, obviously, for my little brain, but at the time, but it's just, a few moments go by though, and on the news, they're talking about Bonner, the news choppers flying over Bonner Springs, the chasers are, in Bonner Springs. So, and I see the tornado on radar. I look at radar again, obviously, it's going right into Bonner. But I noticed that, hey, this thing might kind of be starting to, I don't know, but unravel. But I was like, it's way too early. The debris ball's still there. This thing's doing damage. It's not good. Bonner Springs is in a lot of trouble still. So we pray for Dad and hope everything's going to be all right. But, I noticed that, so somehow, that this tornado has started to weaken over Bonner Springs as it's gone over the town. I'm like, oh my gosh, I think this town was okay. And the relief, I got to tell you, was just as overwhelming as the anxiety, but in a good way. I remember thinking I could kind of breathe. I could kind of, I was like, my dad's not dead. I don't think, I think we might have a house by tomorrow. I think things are looking up. A lot of people in the metro are going to be saved today. Okay, this is okay. And I can kind of actually start to kind of enjoy the storm, as crazy and dumb as it sounds. Like, I can actually kind of take it in, like, hey, we're getting a big supercell that I've thought about for a long time. It's actually happening. I can actually breathe a little bit and take it in. You know what I mean? I was like, okay, it's the tornado's gone, or it's going away. But obviously this thing's not done. It's still in a ripe environment. It's near the warm front. It's got a lot of rotation, wind shear to work with, energy. It's humid. This thing could put down another monster if it wanted to, and it's still a good 15-20 minutes away. So we are not we're not out of the woods. So, and then just like that, the tornado warning gets extended from the river into the southern tip of Platte County where we were. And so we get the alerts on our phones, and we get the sirens start going off outside. I notice everything's wet outside now. It started to rain hard enough. And so at that time, we, even though in my heart I'm kind of thinking, I'm like, okay, well, I'm not nearly as worried as I was before, because the trends I'm seeing on radar, it's starting to weaken a lot. But we get everybody, we get the dogs, and we get my grandparents who happen to be in town that month, and we head downstairs into the basement. So we get down there, we have KMBC 9 online on the iPad, and we're all chilling down there, just kind of on edge, waiting for it to be over. But I'm kind of not really scared anymore, just because I can see the velocity on radar. I don't think there's a tornado on there anymore, on the ground. But I do notice that there's definitely still rotation. One area of rotation kind of passed near our house, just west of us, over Parkville, and went up north into Platte County a little bit, and then dissipated. So that got my attention. I was like, okay, but for the most part, I was like, I think we're gonna be fine somehow, some way. And so things go by, moments go by, and we get out of the basement when the tornado warning clears. And I tell my mom, like, yeah, I think we're okay. And she's like asking, like, are we okay? Look at your radar, are we good? And I'm like, yep. I don't see any velocity couplet anymore, which is just the rotation. We say couplet, you know, I think we're fine. And so we get out and we go back upstairs and continue with our lives. Of course, I keep tracking the storm, but yeah. And so I noticed, though, you know, probably another hour passes, and I noticed that the supercell gets another tornado warning. So it's on the ground again. I'm like, oh my gosh, no way. And so I look at other radar products. You know, of course, there's a hook echo, there's a velocity couplet type velocity signature, and there's a debris ball, big blue ball and radar. I was like, oh my gosh, you have to be joking, kidding me. So I was like, yeah, this tornado is back in the ground. We are out of the path. Obviously, it's past us. I'm not worried about it, but I'm just like, wow, wow, yeah. And this supercell's a tiny thing now. It went from this monstrous high precipitation, bloated supercell thunderstorm to this supercell that was probably, you know, a fourth the size, yet still had a big tornado. I was like, oh my gosh. And so that was going near Excelsior Springs. I was like, oh boy, but we have family up there. So I was like, okay, well, yeah. So we need to. We need to make sure. Hopefully, I hope they're doing okay. And so I move into my mom's area, and I'd say, it's back on the ground again. And she's like, I know. And I walk in, and she has it up on the news. They're on it. And I'm like, yep, that's it. Kearney, Missouri area. It was on the ground again. And then so I think I sit in her room on the couch for a while. You know, we're just there and kind of thinking about everything that had gone down. And excuse me. And eventually they switch back to the helicopter pilot, which is Johnny Rollins, and he is flying above some of the areas where the tornado had crashed through. And I just remember thinking, I was like, wow, yeah. I mean, it didn't surprise me based on the radar signature. I knew it was going to be catastrophic, but, you know, it hit in the middle of the country, you know, so it didn't hit too much, thankfully. But of the neighborhoods, you know, and houses and buildings that did get hit, it was definitely not cool. There was, you know, obviously roofs taken off, you know, parts of roofs collapsed, and then every now and then you'd get in the core and there'd be a house that was, you know, leveled, or, you know, and then I remember seeing this one house in particular, it wasn't destroyed, it was just, you know, it wasn't even leveled, it was just swept away. It was just the foundation with some pieces of debris laid kind of in a line stretching away from it, where you could tell it just got blown away. And I just remember it was at that moment I remember just being like, wow. And I looked over to my mom, and the expression on her face was just priceless. I mean, just priceless. And I remember asking, I remember being like, wow, do you think it's going to be an EF5? And I remember she went, I don't know, but we'll see. I remember thinking about that just briefly. I won't get into all that debate, but I remember being like, wow, this is an EF4, EF5 tornado for sure. I mean, this is one that you wouldn't make it unless you were underground if you got cored by it. So, you know, I just remember being like, man, I hope nobody died. You know, I thought somebody probably would have, though. I mean, so I was like, wow. But yeah, the damage was really crazy seeing that. And then so after that, pretty much kind of wrapped up the night. But mom was like, there's not more coming, right? Like, you check and make sure. I was like, no, but there are supercell storms out west in Kansas that are producing tornadoes as well, kind of out by like Hays, Kansas, and there's one by Wichita too that'll be up here, but it's not producing a tornado. She looked at me and she's like, "Oh, you better not be anymore." All right, exactly. She was like, "All right, I hope we're gonna be okay." And I was like, "I think we are." They've lowered our risk too a little bit, and so, you know, we went to bed and got up the next day, same thing, got to school. And I remember, of course, it's the buzz at school. You know, everyone's talking about it. Oh my gosh, that was so scary. I was so scared, you know, obviously. And I remember I walked by and my reading teacher sees me, and she's like, Mikey, you totally called the EF4 tornado. And I didn't know it had been rated EF4. And so I went, whoa, EF4? I was like, oh my gosh, even though I kind of knew it would have to be that. But I'm like, wow. Dang. And then I asked my science teacher, I passed him, did you hear about the tornado? And he's like, oh, yeah. And, yeah, it was the talk of the school that day for sure. And then later on, we had kind of a movie thing. So it was towards the end of the year, like I said. So we had a lot of free time in there and stuff. And I have a time to tell my reading teacher about the story. And she kind of tells me about hers as well. And I tell her, like, you know, this is before I found out about my dad later, about what had happened to his delivery route. But I tell her, I'm like, my dad was in Bonner Springs and stuff, yeah. And she just went wide-eyed, like, whoa, yeah. I was just like, he made it, though. You know, that town made it. And then she Also tells me about how she was with someone who also had radar scope. So I tell her about the two the two lightning strikes that I saw on the early stages of the storm, and how I knew that meant bad things. And she was like, "Oh yeah, that's right. The guy who was tracking it with us saw that too, and they were plotted on there." And it's interesting, this whole thing. But just a crazy day, to be honest. That day has, I don't think, 5 years almost, I don't think there has been a single day that I haven't thought about that tornado, that whole experience. Not one, to be honest. I think about it every now, or quite a bit, to be honest. It's on my mind a lot for various reasons. But yeah, so Linwood tornado. But yeah, so about my dad. In light of all this, although my dad was directly in line at Highland Apartments to be struck by the tornado if nothing had changed, he was actually in a much better spot than he was supposed to be. It turns out that the day before the tornado, Memorial Day, acted as a Sunday, changing Dad's schedule from Tuesday to Monday, even though the 28th of May was a Tuesday. Because of this, the shift in Dad's timing and placement, though subtle, saved him from being caught in the open while delivering, and allowed him time to evacuate Linwood and Stillwell roads as the tornado bore down on him before the places he had just stood minutes earlier were obliterated. A month after the twister, on the 29th of June, my birthday actually, I had my second flight lesson and went up in a Cessna 172. The route we took happened to go right over the path of the mile-wide monster from a few weeks before, giving my parents and I a unique view of what tornadoes are capable of, and for us, a reminder of what was supposed to happen to us. Blue tarps laid secured on tops of homes that were spared the devastation. Trees, once full of May leaves, stood bare and twisted, looking like wooden forks that had been chewed on. And so, this event really just boggles my mind every day to this day, for, a few different reasons, but, excuse me, just the fact that it even happened in the first place, a mile-wide wedge tornado, EF4 plus tornado, is something that you think only happens on TV, You think of Joplin, Missouri, Tuscaloosa, El Reno, or more, or whichever one you think of. A tornado of that magnitude is, that's always the worst-case scenario, the what if, To think that type of tornado actually happened this close to where I live, the widest likely on record for our area, is just crazy. And then also just thinking how close I was to losing so much that day. It was, could not have been more on track to hit our house. Thankfully it lifted when it did and spared not just us but a lot of others. But, how close I was to losing my dad. I should have lost my dad that day. But for two reasons: his schedule change and the fact the tornado lifted as it went over him just really, saved him. And sometimes I feel a little guilty, but it also helps knowing obviously I'm not in any control of what happened that day, and the fact that another thing that boggles my mind is that nobody died in this tornado. So yeah, I think had it not happened over the country, that would have been different, obviously, but somehow nobody died in this storm, and that helps me a lot. I think if that hadn't have been the case, the whole survivor's guilt thing would be a lot different. So, that's definitely good. I'm glad everybody pulled through and made it. But yeah, just a lot of one in a million things this day. The fact that it even happened, the fact that that's where Dad was, the fact that it took out a good chunk of his workplace. It, just not only that, but this tornado, from a weather nerd perspective, it was also the first ever and only tornado as of this video to have ever had sensor probes, like in the movie Twister, launched into it and flew up through it collecting data. So that's pretty cool. They did that with a model rocket, some well-known chasers, and got some really cool data. But so yeah, a historic tornado there. So it's like, and then of course everyone survived, like I said, and then some other chasers that I respect as well also deployed probes in this. So just a lot of crazy 1 in a billion things that happened with this one tornado. I just can't believe it happened. I can, obviously I watched it happen, but I hope you see it. It's crazy. A lot of good and bad things, a lot of good and bad 1 in a million things happened that were just really hard to believe. And so that's why, if you know me, you know I talk about this storm all the time. It's always on my mind. It's always, like, oh yeah, this tornado, no. So that's why this tornado will always, I have a very love and hate relationship with this tornado, but it's a very, it'll always have a special place in my heart. So yeah, thank you for listening to my story, and please tell me your tornado story in the comments below. Please tell me where you were and what tornado it was and what happened. Also, I'd love to hear anyone's experience experiences with this tornado, because I'm sure there's some of you watching that had experiences with this one as well. So yeah, I'd love to hear, and thank you for watching. And I'd like to say, if you've been affected by a tornado or anything else really like that, I'm just really sorry, because the anxiety of having a tornado of historic proportions bear down on you and someone you love like that is really kind of top tier. There's not much you could have made. There's nothing you could have done to make that anxiety worse, unless you had made it actually hit us. So if you've ever dealt with a tornado like that, I'm so sorry. And I just want to say, this tornado has really helped me see, Corey, it doesn't matter if you're into weather or not. Weather's personal, when that stuff happens. It didn't matter in that moment. Like I said, I didn't want to see that storm anymore. It's coming for me. So I'm so sorry, and what you had to lose and go through and see. And obviously it's important that I had this event happen to remind me, as a storm chaser, I'm not invincible, and these things can still happen, and I'm gonna see some bad things storm chasing, unfortunately. But it's my duty, I think, as a storm chaser, to give back to the people impacted in any way. So because of this tornado and because of the whole probe thing that happened with it, it always kind of left me with a sense of, kind of from a storm chaser standpoint, I was like, I wasn't out storm chasing this, and this was local. This was almost my storm in a way. Obviously, no storm belongs to me. Obviously, I see that. I don't mean it in that sense, but I was just like, this is local. I should have been there. I should have been a part of this in a good way. I should have warned people better. I should have done something. I should have, this is too close and too anomalous to not do anything about, you know what I'm saying? And so it kind of left this in me. I was like, well, what can I do in the years later, And so this has made me want to go into efforts, some of which involve probes, actually, to not only study tornadoes, but to help the people and raise money for people who have been hit. So, a lot, definitely some good things have come out of this. But yeah, I'm just so. Anyone who's been hit, I hope that those efforts will help you. Help you in the future. Or anyone who's going to be hit in the future, I'm pulling for you and I'm with you. I'm so sorry again, but thank you for watching. I hope it was enjoyable. I hope I didn't stutter too much. I hope my ADHD didn't riddle this story too bad. So I hope it was good. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you can take something away from it. All right, thank you.